Good evening, everyone. This is the December 10th, 2019 Parks, Recreation, Human Services, and Public Safety Committee meeting. We will begin with, it looks like there's no public comment unless we have any pink sheets over there, Mary? No pink sheets. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to committee business. And the first order is the approval of the November 12th, 2019 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes as written.
And I will second that.
Great. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the monthly report on the PAC operations. We have Autumn Grissett and Brian Hoffman.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, council members. You have in front of you our November 2019 report that was sent out on Friday for your review. In November, we had 10 usage days versus 16 in 2018. Theater rental and PAC Presents held in November, again, were Wednesday rehearsals with the Federal Way Youth Symphony, Arts for Youth performance on November 13th, as well as a public performance. Charlie Brown Christmas had 2 shows on November 22nd, and then a Christmas with the Nelsons on November 23rd. There were 4 event space rentals in the month of November. Women to Watch event, Ashley House 30th birthday celebration, the NGI banquet, and Sound Transit open house. As we move on, what is up on the screen as well is our monthly year-over-year comparison. Total rehearsal days in 2018, we are down 4, but that is okay. We've discussed before that rehearsal days year-over-year, we have a higher revenue this year. Performing arts rentals, PAC Presents series, Arts for Youth matinees, all total to a total of 19 events versus 12 this year. You can see, though, that with the total number of tickets sold, we went from 985 last year to 1,345. So although you see that the number of events is down, ticket sales are up. You can also see this in total gross rental revenue and gross food and beverage revenue year over year. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Committee, any questions? Autumn, what is the NGI banquet, just so I could, for my own understanding?
Absolutely. Brian, can you remind me of the acronym?
I have no idea, to be honest with you. It's a long acronym, and I don't know it off the top of my head, so.
We will find that out for you and
Yeah.
get back to you.
Okay, but it's like a rental.
Yeah, it was a
for
rental.
the day. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee? Well, it looks like we have a few performances coming up in December. How's the marketing and promotion for those events?
So with a handful of our events that are coming up in December, a lot of them are rentals or outside user groups with our resident artist groups. So a lot of them are handling their own marketing. Excuse me, for us, the only one that we're handling is the Kalimba, which is Earth, Wind, and Fire holiday tribute concert event that is being held on December 20th. So, and those tickets are approximately around 200. The other ones, we're assisting with marketing through our Facebook and email blasts, but those are responsible. All the ones in December are the responsibility of the renter or the user group that are renting the facility.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Can you tell me what Frosty Fest is? I've been trying to figure that one out.
Yeah.
So Frosty Fest is this Thursday, and we have 4 country artists that are performing. This is a partnership with Hubbard Radio Station out of Seattle. So the 2 main headliners are Thompson Square, which is a country artist, as well as Maddie and Tay. And then there's 2 other opening acts that will be performing as well. So it's kind of a play with the radio station that we came up with the idea of Frosty Fest for a winter carnival type concert.
So it's a concert.
Yes, ma'am. And that's sold out. We have less than
Okay.
20 tickets left.
So 700 and some seats?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
Great. Committee, any other questions? Well, thank you. I think that's all we have. I appreciate the presentation, Brian and Autumn, and keep doing the good work.
Actually, I do have
Thank
one
you.
more
Oh,
question.
Deputy Mayor Honda, sorry.
Naming rights. Have any progress on that?
No, we're still plugging away at that. As I said at the last meeting, we've hired our new AGM, Director of Food and Beverage, that will be kind of helping me on the day-to-day operations to allow more focus on that. But we have started with some lower-level partnerships that we're working on, and hopefully we'll finalize and bring that report back to you in January.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So next we have the Arts Commission 2020 Work Plan. We have Cody here and for a couple items, actually.
Thank you, council members. Yes, we have 2 Arts Commission items before you guys tonight, and I also have Dan Hirschman, the Chair of the Arts Commission. If you have any questions, first up is, should the council approve the Arts Commission 2020 Work Plan? Is there any questions on the work plan itself?
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. So as a past Arts Commission member, I have some questions. The sponsor piano in the park, there was some issues with that this last summer. Are those issues going to be addressed so that we don't run into the same problem?
We will address those issues before, the piano in the park is still on the work plan, but if we don't address the staffing issues out there at the park itself, then we will have to make that decision whether to promote that piece or not. Dan, do you have anything you want to ask?
I wanted to include that item in the work plan, continuing forward, recognizing the issues that we had this last year. The 2 requirements that we're going to place on going forward on that is, number 1, that there are park personnel there to secure the piano in the evening. Essentially, at the beginning of the program, there was a locked cover that was placed over the piano that protected it from the elements as well as any potential vandalism. However, with the absence of a park person there in the evening, that was not possible. Also, I'm looking at restricting the time use of the piano from the full summer months, from basically July through beginning of September, to a 3-week period during our, quote, sunny season at the end of July to the middle of August, to protect it from the elements. The first couple of years we had an extended season. We kind of got lucky with dry weather, but this year at the beginning of July it was quite rainy, and with that piano being exposed to the elements, that tended to cause the keys to delaminate, and that's an invitation for vandalism, and then it starts a cycle. So 2 things. Number 1, obviously having park personnel there to monitor it and lock it up in the evening and unlock it in the morning and make it available to people. But also the second thing is also the shorter window where that would be exposed.
Okay. And I have a couple other questions. One, on the public art maintenance, we started that when I was on the Arts Commission 8 years ago, or longer than that. How is that going? Is the public art actually being maintained? Is there work crews that go out and?
How it's worked in the past couple of years, is that it's been broken up between arts commissioners. So they had the artwork at Dumas Bay or the artwork at Steel Lake, and they would go out and check it and then report back to staff, and then staff would then fill out a parks work order for any cleanup or maintenance that needs to happen, or any major maintenance. We haven't had any major maintenance happen in the last couple of years, though.
Okay. The traffic graphics, which I really like. When that first started, there was a question about if businesses had a utility box in front of their business, if they wanted that covered, if they could pay for it. Has that been explored, or is it just all being financed by the city?
At this point, it's being financed by the city. We haven't had any commissioners in the last year really take that effort up and go out and approach businesses.
Okay. And then the cultural plan. So there's been some discussion about updating the cultural plan. So that costs money. And when I left excuse me, when I left the Arts Commission, there was two separate budgets. One was like a savings account. It had about $50,000 in it, and that was for the cultural plan to be updated when the PAC was finished, which is what For Culture had recommended. Does that still exist?
I'm not 100% sure on the accuracy of it, but I believe it was used in the PAC, somewhere in the PAC process. So that budget does not exist anymore.
Is there funding to update the cultural plan? Do you have the money?
No.
Do you know what it would cost?
We have not bid that project out because we don't have a funding source at this point, but we can certainly do that.
When we had talked about doing it, For Culture had said that the original cultural plan was very well written, which it is. It's an amazing document, and that it only really needed to be updated, which should not cost at that, like 8 years ago was like $10,000. But I don't know what it would cost these days.
Yeah, it's 1994 is the last cultural plan, so at this point, the feeling is that it's out of date at this point. I think is the feeling of the Arts Commission, but
I gave a report to the Arts Commission last year on proposing a revision of it. I accompanied it with a major report on demographics change since the early 1990s. Also, I included the fact in the summary that the original cultural plan was basically wrapped around a feasibility study for the PAC, which was appropriate at that time. But I agree with you completely that the time has come now that the PAC is finished. We need to determine from the public how we wish to use that facility. So I am in complete agreement, and I would look forward to continuing that discussion.
Okay, I think the time is now that we work on the cultural plan, so, but we do need to know what it would cost before we move forward. And one last question, we have the art galleries here and down at Dumas Bay. What about the PAC, doing a art gallery there?
yeah, we have had that discussion with the PAC, and it sounds like Brian and Spectra are open to that conversation.
Okay, it would be more accessible than, here it's only open during business hours and not on weekends. And Dumas Bay, it's only open when Center Stage is there. So the PAC is a little bit more accessible for most people, I would think.
The gallery at Dumas Bay is also open during business hours, 9 to 5, when Dumas Bay is open as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Any other questions about the work plan?
Just a quick question around the economic growth through the community arts development. It does have a TBD there. What is kind of the scope and sequence of what that could look like, or is it still being planned out?
We're attempting to formalize the process that's already been taking place. The Arts Commission is tasked with providing advice to the council on the arts in the community. And there's the obvious fact that the PAC is the focus of our cultural center here in the city. So we are attempting to essentially merely formalize the process of exchange between the Arts Commission and the PAC management on a cultural plan going forward. So we've left the task list to be determined because we're just initially getting started.
Great, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Great, are we ready for a motion?
Yeah, I move to approve the Arts Commission 2020 work plan and forward to the January 7th, 2020 City Council consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the 2020 contract for services. Cody?
Yes, and the second question before you is, should you approve the contract for service funding recommendations from the Arts Commission? And again, Dan Hirschman, our chair, is with us to explain any questions you may have on that. The attachment gives the allocation, beginning with Center Stage at $12,500, the Federal Way Chorale at $4,500, the Harmony Kings and Jet Cities Chorus at $1,500 each, Federal Way Symphony at $12,500, Rosebud Children's Theater $4,000, Federal Way Youth Orchestra $500, Northwest Symphony $2,500, South King Tool Library Art Project, 500, and the Federal Way Lions Club Make Music Day at 500. On the right-hand side of that worksheet is their funding, what the program is that they're asking for the funding for.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Councilmember Copeland.
Cody, I think one of the nice annual events that has come to fruition here has been the Blues Festival. I understand that they didn't ask for any money, did they?
They have asked for separate requests the last 2 years, but there's still the Federal Way Symphony organization running that, and so they've just asked for one amount this year instead of breaking that out.
Okay, good. Thank you, that's all I've got.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Northwest Symphony, that's an outside organization, one can assume, along with Rosebud Children's. But I assume they serve a lot of Federal Way community members, is that correct? Can you tell me the makeup of the Northwest Symphony?
The Northwest Symphony is a South King County orchestra that performs in various locations, Highline Performing Arts Center, Benaroya Hall, a couple of church events. That symphony has done a program the last several years working closely with the Highline School District in terms of doing a family concert each fall where students from the music programs in the Highline School District come and perform with the Northwest Symphony at that concert hall. Not only do they perform, but also musicians and the conductor, Anthony Spain, goes out to those schools and works with the students, first in small groups and then in larger groups. That's funded by a grant, separate grant from a separate agency that Northwest Symphony has had. I watched that program going on for a number of years and recommended and asked the Northwest Symphony if they could extend that to our Federal Way School District students as well. So for the last 3 years, they have come down and in the fall have done a program which involves both Highline School District students and Federal Way Public School students in a performance with the symphony. Again, in both situations, the musicians and the conductor visit the schools and work with the students in a small group basis before the main performance, and that's funded by like I said, that outside grant. The grant, the monies that the Federal Northwest Symphony has asked us for is to in part compensate for the costs of the doing it in the PAC Performance Hall. So that is valuable to the commission as it supports youth and the arts, our local Federal Way students, and it also supports getting families and parents and kids in the Performing Arts Hall who might not visit otherwise. For a lot of these kids who perform in that concert, it may be the only time in their lives they ever have a chance to be on that stage. The Children's Theater Company is a group that's been active in Federal Way for a number of years, and they put on special performances for elementary students and high school students at various times of the year during the wintertime and during the summertime in kind of a drama camp. And I believe they also do drama instruction at the community center. And as I have been on the chair, youth-oriented funding of the arts and exposure to the arts has been a primary importance, and that's why we have supported these two organizations.
Do we have data in terms of how many students do we serve that the Northwest Symphony serves and works with?
I don't have that right now, but I have been active with the orchestra in terms of organizing that with the various high school teachers.
Okay, and you said that 2,500 covers pretty much their performance of the PAC, right?
For them to perform one evening at the Performing Arts and Events Center is anywhere from between $4,500 to about $3,900. So they are getting a part of that, funding for that. They also give quite a number of comp tickets to families and parents of students that are performing in that concert as well. They've done it successfully in terms of the fact that they have a pretty positive income flow for concerts at the Highland Performing Arts Center and the Benaroya Hall in the fall that somewhat compensates for the fact that they do lose money off of that concert.
I guess the other question I'm kind of curious about is what I'm hearing you say is that the Northwest Symphony utilizes youth and engages youth, and so how is that different from the Federal Way Youth Orchestra? Would be kind of my curiosity question.
Well, the Federal Way Youth Orchestra is a very highly select group of students. As you well know, I taught orchestra for 20-something years in the Federal Way Public Schools. They are very dedicated young students. I had the pleasure of working with them, but they are a very select group. What the Federal Way Symphony has done is incorporate those students into their programs to some extent this year in terms of a guest player and a family concert. But the way I would differentiate between the two organizations is that the Federal Way Youth Symphony plays and performs regularly in the PAC. The students who are involved in the Northwest Symphony program do not do that. That would be their only opportunity to be within that institution as a performer.
Okay, thanks.
Committee, any other questions? Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. On the Children's Dance Theater, they requested $5,017, and they were given $0. What is that group?
The Children's Dance Company
Dance
Theater. That's a new application that was done this year. There was a fair amount of discussion over it. The lack of funding at this point is the kind of peculiarities, I guess, of the duality of the dance being a for-profit organization, but the performances being a nonprofit. I believe at the time that we did the interviews, they did not have their nonprofit status as of that time. That was an issue to some of the commissioners. I believe that they do have their nonprofit status at this time, but there's a sort of a division that we would like to have settled, which is the for-profit aspect of the dance instruction that runs parallel to the now nonprofit aspect of the actual performances.
So is it a Federal Way group? Or do they have?
It's not a Federal Way group. I believe that their studios are located in Bonnie Lake. I specifically asked them during the interviews.
I can answer that because they're a contractor with us. They have a studio right here off 9th in Federal Way, and then Auburn is their
it's that, okay,
Auburn
that.
Children's Dance, but they're the group that performed at the tree lighting ceremony.
Yeah, okay.
And so they do run a big dance camp with the community center through in the summer that performs at Dumas Bay, but they do have a building and a studio here in Federal Way.
Yeah, okay, I know who they are. Okay,
Thank you for the correction.
thank you. So did they ask why they weren't funded?
They have not asked at this point why they aren't funded, but there was some ambiguity when they interviewed about which their for-profit versus their nonprofit status, and they didn't have a nonprofit status at the time.
Okay. Well, thank you for all that you guys do. I really appreciate it.
Councilmember Moore?
I think that it's safe to say, Mr. Hirschman, that this is a hard job to be able to allocate funding for certain organizations and reviewing all the applications and whatnot. So certainly appreciate all the effort that the commission puts through as well. Just to kind of continue to get a better understanding as well. South King Tool Library, it's a great, I mean, we have many great things in Federal Way, of course, but certainly excited about the prospects of what they're doing. I see that they got 500, they asked for 2,500. The request was for art installation, I guess payment to artists. Can you talk more about that? Can you kind of just enlighten us why such a huge difference of funding? Just, I want to know what was discussed.
They gave a presentation to us in September regarding a rather ambitious program at the library of outdoor art. Kind of, how could I describe it? Sort of crafty art, sort of. Is that a right word? Yeah. So it's there's a lot of potential there, and they're kind of getting started on that. They have a number of different funding sources. In September, when they gave their presentation, I encouraged them to write up a proposal and send it to us for funding. But during their presentation, I think that the commissioners decided that since there was no other organization funding an arts program there, that we shouldn't take on entirely funding their request. I encouraged them to find other funding sources as well, in addition to us. In other words, we felt that their request was worthy, but we didn't feel we could, with our current budget, take on the full scope of the project that they were proposing, as worthy as it was.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think, just kind of a comment to my colleagues, and that's, I'm fairly content with this proposal. I think something to kind of be aware of, and Dan, Mr. Hirschman, rather, I appreciated your explanation for the Northwest Symphony, and I appreciated how the fact that you shared that there's a connection to Federal Way students. I think that's really important, and I'm certainly would love to see the data, so I'll follow up with you in an email if that's okay, and council may be interested in that data as well. So I appreciate that, because I think that helped me understand the connection. And I think what's really important as we look at Federal Way dollars, Federal Way tax dollars, is that it really serves Federal Way organizations that are based here in Federal Way. And I think that's something that's really important. And I think it's fair to say that maybe someone looking at this can go, Northwest Symphony, they're not even from Federal Way. Why are we putting our taxpayer dollars in here? So that explanation that you gave, I think, brought some clarity to it. So thank you for that, and I'll look forward to the follow-up on that with the data.
And Councilmember Moore, I'll just say that the Arts Commission does their due diligence. There's a lot of healthy debate in that room, and they definitely put in their time and their effort to make sure that these dollars are accounted for in the right way. So,
I think one thing to consider, too, is not every organization that effectively serves the arts community in Federal Way is based in Federal Way, but they're still doing good work. If they're serving the community, then supporting them is something that, I think that should be a discussion. So I personally don't care where they're from, as long as they're effectively serving the city of Federal Way. So I think I don't want to create an artificial construct, at least from my part, for this. But I just had a larger picture on, or just kind of an overarching question on funding. Funding has been flat. Actually, it's gone down in the last 6 years, but it's been relatively flat. What would additional funding for the Arts Commission actually mean for the community? How would it enhance? I mean, as we prioritize going in 2020, and obviously with the budget coming up in 2021 and 22, I mean, we can keep doing the same thing over and over again. And obviously, you're getting less and less money because the money doesn't go as far. But when we look at prioritization as a council, what justification would there be for us to increase funding to the arts? And what would the benefit of the community be as a result?
Do you have the numbers on the total requests?
Yeah, right here.
We have organizations that for this year requested and that is requested and backed up with reasonable data suggesting that it was an actual expense incurred. They asked for $95,000, and we were only able to allocate a little over $40,000.
Sure.
So there is a big deficit that's not being addressed. Over the
Yeah,
4 years that I've been on the commission, we've had a number, I believe that the arts community in Federal Way is maturing. We're seeing growth of the PAC. We're seeing the growth of a city. And as a consequence of that, there are more organizations and more people asking for money. This year, we have more requests than we've ever had. We've got the Make Music Day. We've got the Children's Dance Theater. We've got funding for the Tool Library to be factored in. When you have two organizations such as the Federal Way Symphony and the Chorale, and the Center Stage, actually three, I guess, who've traditionally taken up the vast majority of our budget, we're faced with a difficult task of taking money from those organizations in order to give a small amount of important but needed support for startup arts organizations.
would you say that the cultural events within Federal Way would be more accessible to the community in general if we were to increase funding to these different organizations? I mean, I think we've seen the Make Music project, we've seen the Blues Festival be created. So there's things that are happening. Will we see more organizations doing cultural events, or would it be, would that money basically serve a small number of people more, but not really impact the community as a whole?
Well, I think that it would, obviously, for our major beneficiaries, it would be a help and a relief, because over the last few years, there's been sort of a leveling and, in the case of a couple of organizations, a depression of funding. So there is a component that those existing organizations would be able to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief.
Sure.
But also, I do believe that it would foster more participation and more involvement in the arts by a number of communities, especially those who are oriented towards youth programs and that are not part of the big mainstream. I think that what we're seeing here this year with a number of requests is because I and the commission have been out and actively promoting the arts and promoting the idea of Federal Way as an arts center. So I would suggest it would be both. It would be beneficial to our existing organizations, plus we would also see greater participation by the community in a whole in the process.
Okay. I think just for future reference, from my perspective, if we can get cultural events established within the community, additional funding for the arts programs is something that I would definitely support. I think that creating the synergies that come with engaging the community in productive ways and creating new traditions in our city is something that we really need to look at. I think the arts are a huge component of creating our city and creating the culture of our city. So I just definitely would like to see us focus on how we can partner with organizations that can create those kind of synergies for us. But again, that's a conversation for another day, but just my heart to your heart as far as the arts and how important they are, I think, to creating community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. I've been on both sides of this. I've been a member of an arts group that requested funding from the Arts Commission, and then I've been an arts commissioner. And the time that I spent on the Arts Commission, we were never able to completely fund every single group. You're doing really good, in my opinion, with giving Center Stage $12,500. They requested $30,000, and the Federal Way Symphony requested $25,000, and they got half of what they requested. So back in the day, when I was on the Arts Commission, we were fortunate if we were able to give them half of what they were asking. I don't disagree that I think the arts need to be funded more in federal way, and hopefully one day we'll be able to do that. The sooner the better, because especially with young children and elementary kids, if they participate in music and the arts in some way, they actually do better in school, and there's data to prove that. And if we can enhance their ability to be introduced to different forms of art, as a city, we'll have happier families and happier children. So I think eventually we need to have that discussion. But thank you.
Yeah, I agree on both Councilmember Kopang and Deputy Mayor's points. Just kind of looking at the broad list here, how do we go deeper with a few organizations that can expand into more different varieties of the arts and music? And I think we do have some trusted organizations here that we've worked with for a long time, or at least the last few years. And so I'm just kind of thinking about with the cultural plan, how can we expand that list? And so it's not, 3-4 orchestra organizations or symphony organizations, but going deeper with those ones that we trust and value and can bring the most return on investment for our community and our youth. So just thinking about that with the cultural plan, I don't know how that works into it in the future, but I think there's definitely room for conversation on that. So I guess we can go ahead and vote unless there's any more comments by committee. So I'll entertain a motion.
I move to forward the proposed, I move to forward I move to approve the 2020 Arts Commission contract for services funding recommendation and forward to the January 7th, 2020 City Council consent agenda for approval.
Second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to recuse myself because I sit on the board for the Federal Way Symphony.
Great. Well, thank you for providing that information. So Councilmember Kopang and I will move forward. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So motion passes with 2 votes and 1 recusal. Thank you both, Mr. Hirschman and Cody, for being here and presenting and all the work the Arts Commission does.
Thank you very much.
So we will move forward. The chief is here in place of Commander Jones, and he will present first the PSERN radio end user service level agreement.
Good evening, Chairman Johnson, Deputy Mayor, council members. PSERN stands for Puget Sound Emergency Radio Network, and the police department is here tonight to seek your approval to enter into an agreement, end-user service level. This is an emergency radio system, communication system for King County wide. So that encompasses 39 cities and all law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, and medical personnel. This is a voter-approved effort to replace our regional aging radio communication system. It's about a $280 million project approved by the voters. This system PSERN is jointly owned by City of Seattle, King County, East Side Public Safety Communication Agency, and Valley Communication Center. And we are one of 5 owner agencies for Valley Communications. So this will tremendously improve our radio system here. There's some decent areas, bad areas. Federal Way's been really kind of a bad area with the current 800 megahertz radio system. This will tremendously enhance our communication capability here in Federal Way. So the end-user radios will be distributed, everything's on schedule, should be distributed February of 2022, and the entire project for this new radio system will be completed July of 2022. So roughly 2.5 years out for this new radio system to take place. In order for us to use these radios, every emergency agency has to sign this agreement. So we're seeking your approval to enter into this user level agreement.
Thank you, Chief. Committee, any questions? Councilmember Kofang?
Chief, I think the challenge in Federal Way in particular is the geography. Is that right? Just the fact that, or the topography, that we've got
Topography.
pockets that are the signal overshoots, basically, right?
That's
That-
correct. The tower that covers our west end of our city is on Vashon Island. And this new radio system will have, the IDEA site will be right in Browns Point, up on the hill. So there'll be more towers, but we did have radio issues, and we worked with King County Radios on this issue. And basically, our best answer was, in this new radio system, they were going to make sure that they really took care of, Federal Way in terms of communication. I think it's going to be entire King County, don't quote me on this, but like 94% coverage, which is tremendously higher than what it is today.
Okay.
And there are also enhancements being made for building bidirectional amplifiers, particularly in Seattle and some of these high-rise buildings. So the system would be much more effective.
Okay. And I didn't see a cost in here. This is an agreement without a cost associated with it at this point?
It's all included, so the entire project for the new radio system, I think it was $270-some million project. But as of this year, I think they're projecting it to be $281 million in 2019, and it's all included. So when we get our radios, it'll be a swap. With our current radio, we turn in our old radios, they give us a new one. So this is just a service agreement. We do not have to pay anything.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't want to assume anything, but we're entering into an agreement, and that agreement doesn't have any monetary responsibility attached to it.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed PCERN Radio End User Service Level Agreement to the January 7th, 2020 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have the Chief again for agreement between the WTSC and the Federal Way Police Department to provide grant funding for traffic enforcement.
Okay, and WTC stands for Washington Traffic Safety Commission. I think I've been before you on several occasions regarding traffic safety grant, but we are wanting to seek council committee approval and council approval to accept $19,000 in order to conduct extra traffic emphasis patrol. And simply put, accepting this money will enhance the level of traffic enforcement in our city, making our streets safer. I know people don't, and I've said this before too, people really don't talk about traffic safety so much. I think that there's hyper focus on crime and other issues, but I will say it again tonight, the greatest threat to our citizens, average law-abiding citizens, is traffic-related injuries and fatalities. So I think it's important for us to continue to do this, and as long as the Traffic Safety Commission is willing to provide us grants, it just adds our enforcement level. Our patrol officers are doing enforcement traffic level. This puts out extra patrol to do DUI enforcement, seatbelt enforcement, distracted driving enforcement, so it'll enhance it.
Thank you, Chief. And I think this year we've noticed quite a few, at least newsworthy incidents involving traffic situations and accidents, at least in the last 6 months. It just seems like there's been a lot. Can you speak to exactly what the grant will enhance within our department and where, I guess, located within the city?
$19,000 will be a significant amount of money in terms of overtime enforcement. I can't tell you exactly what it'll equate to, but it'll be basically just throughout our entire city. But the traffic lieutenant will give directions to people who want to sign up for additional emphasis patrol. He'll put out and say, I'd like to focus on DUI enforcement on these dates. And the lieutenant will pick dates that he knows that there's people are more likely to drink and drive. So it might be on a holiday where we know people. So they'll do DUI enforcement on days like that. But one of the greatest reasons for the number of traffic accidents is really distracted driving. People, getting on the phone. It's not very common to see people at intersections, they're texting, or they're looking at their phone. You could sit at any intersection and catch people doing that. And there's a lot of educational prevention that needs to occur because these phones are very addictive and people can't put it down. But those are the types where you end up, hitting a pedestrian or hitting the vehicle in front of you because your attention is distracted. So every opportunity, we want to get the word out, but enforcement is one piece of keeping our streets safe because a lot of motorists will obey the law because of that enforcement threat. And this $19,000, I can't tell you exactly what many hours, but it's quite a bit. That's a lot of hours of enforcement for $19,000.
Committee, any questions?
Do we have any, we've got those reader boards that we emphasize or we advertise for events. Would we do any enhanced enforcement messages for community during this time?
That's a good suggestion and recommendation. I don't think we've done that so much with
Okay.
traffic enforcement, but I think it's not bad to certainly put that out during holiday season about maybe drinking and driving type of
Yeah,
message or
for
something
sure.
like that, Target Zero message, sure.
Okay.
So I'll look into that.
Okay, very good.
Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. I was observing court last month, and one of the people in court, his phone had fallen, and he picked it up when he was stopped at a stoplight and had gotten a ticket and was trying to explain why it was in his hand. He still was fined the fine because the law states that you can't have your phone in your hand even when you're stopped at a red light or whatever. I don't know that a lot of people know that that's law. I think that people, they understand that they shouldn't be texting or looking at their phone when they're driving, but I don't think they get it, that even when you're at a red light, it's not, you're not to be looking at it or having it in your hand. And you can be, excuse me, you can be ticketed, and it's a very expensive fine.
It's $100, isn't it?
Yes.
It's possible people don't know, but there was a very strong campaign. There was a grace period by the Washington State Patrol. So I don't know. I think most people know that you can't be talking on the phone with the phone to your ear, or I think most people know, most people, I think some people might not, but they know they can't be texting and driving, whether you're stopped or not. So if they don't know, we're there to educate.
Well, that ticket will educate them
lesson.
for sure.
Yeah.
You guys are tough teachers.
Any other questions, committee? Do I have a motion?
Yes, I move to forward the agreement between the WTSC, the Federal Way Police Department, to the January 7th, 2020 Council consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, we will go ahead and adjourn, and the next regular meeting is January 14th, 2020.
See you next year.